Good evening. Today is October 9th, 2012, and this evening we are having an impromptu debate. The topic, which was given 20 minutes ago, that is going to be debated is, be it resolved that oldest children have it best. Please welcome for 7 minutes to argue for the motion, Michael, Prime Minister.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, when my mother tried to breastfeed me when I was a baby, my oldest sister put up such a damn fuss that my mother had to discontinue breastfeeding me. And you know what those early years are, early times are very important to a person's upbringing. Believe me, my sister had it best. Oldest children have it best. We define oldest children as the firstborn in a traditional family, have it best, have a greater likelihood to turn out to be well-adjusted, happy adults. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to look at this from 3 points of view: the emotional, the financial, and the social. Let's look at the emotional aspects. Firstborn children have undivided love and attention, and I can assure you that that's really important. When you're in a very competitive situation, you get some of the attention, not as much as you need, particularly for a newborn. And without getting maudlin about this, I can only relate my own experience. The second point would be, from an emotional point of view, that you get the firstborn child get more and probably for a number of years only undivided help with problems, with social difficulties, with homework, with school. You know, if you have 5 kids and how can you go to 5 parent nights? It's almost impossible. How can you see all the teachers? It's firstborn children get more love and attention, which is extremely important. And as I said, they get more help with homework and problems and just general living. The attention and time is unbelievably valuable. And in fact, societies usually tended towards more children for economic reasons because they needed the labor that those children provided. And as societies become more affluent, as you well know, the birth rate shrinks because that's really the desirable family unit. But in primitive societies, they needed everybody out there working on the farm or just to survive. So now that people have a choice, the choice they're making is to having very small families. And the first one is the one that gets all of the undivided love and attention. Another point of view is that relationships, from the point of view of the relationship of the parents, when you start to have 2 and 3 children, it becomes a very strained environment, and that stress and strain affects the children. And not only does it affect the children, it affects the very relationship. And many, many marriages are in serious difficulty because they have too many children, and it is such a strain on them emotionally that the later children suffer from this. And I'm sure you all know examples, and sadly I hope you aren't examples. Doting grandparents. We all know how grandparents dote and provide financial resources, love and affection, aunts and uncles, neighbors, friends. When you have that first child, they're all over there, and and love and that physical, tactile experience is really important to a developing mind. And for a young child to have all of those people doting on them and loving them and caring and playing games with them and taking them places, it's hard to provide that love and attention to when you have 5 different grandchildren. So that's an important consideration too. Let's look briefly at, not so briefly, at some of the financial considerations. As you well know, certain societies favor the firstborn. Certainly in monarchies, certainly in many primitive societies, the firstborn get most of the benefits. Another consideration is that the space and privacy problems. When you have 2, 3, you all know, some of you maybe had to sleep in a room with a brother or a sister. Maybe not a sister, well, if you're a woman. so that there's a space problem. You know, if you're loaded, that's fine. But if you're living in a 2-bedroom apartment and you've got 3 kids, lots of luck. Those kids are going to suffer. They're just not going to have the privacy and the space that people need. So, you know, you've all talked about rich families, okay, then maybe this is a slightly different argument. I don't think so. But in this consideration, in a middle-class society, space, privacy, resources is a real concern. And the first child gets usually the majority of that kind of thing. So the depleting financial resources is really important. If you have one child, or the first child is usually the one that gets the college education. If there's enough money left over, maybe the second and third get a college education as well. Maybe they don't. Again, if you come from a rich family, this isn't an issue. But it is an issue going to college today. You know it's a cost of fortune. And that if you have 2 and 3 kids, those later kids may not be able, they may have to provide their own education and end up with a massive student loan. The first child is probably the least likely to have a student loan. To look at a few other considerations, the social considerations, they don't live in this unbelievably competitive situation of sibling rivalries. That competition is straining on the parents. It's straining on the children. It can involve fighting and rivalries and fighting for attention of the parents. And that fighting isn't necessarily conducive to it. Was that the bell?
Yeah.
Not necessarily conducive to a well-adjusted future. Parents, from a social point of view, take courses, they read books, they study how to be a parent, they ask their friends. By the time the second and third kids come along, they're just winging it. You know, they're just winging it. So that's an important consideration too. Let me just look here. I don't know if I touched on this, but from a social point of view, that the parents today, to provide for all of these kids when they're second and third children, are usually physically exhausted. And I don't have to lay that home to those of you who are, I don't know how many of you have children. This might be a different vote tonight if in fact some of you had 2 or 3 kids at home, which I don't think is the case for most of probably puts us at a little disadvantage. So imagine you got a lot of kids when you vote. Anyway, I believe my time is up, and all I can say is my sister had it a hell of a lot better than I did.
There we are. Thank you, Michael. We will continue with the second speaker as a leader of the opposition to counter the arguments and present arguments of his own side. Please help me welcome for 7 minutes, Adrian.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let me be clear, the sort of whining we just heard from the Prime Minister is exactly the sort of thing that older siblings have had to deal with. Wah, 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 wah. However, once we get through the whining and the moaning and, oh, my older brother, sister had it better because blah, 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 we'll get to some arguments which are actually based in fact. Now, the Prime Minister said that, the first argument the Prime Minister said that was emotional was that they get undivided love and attention. And all of you, I'm sure, have been children, and you're the firstborn. Imagine yourself, you're the firstborn, and you have all this love and attention, apparently, maybe, if your parents are loving and attentive and are perfect and have always given you love and attention. And we all know some parents don't really do that. The Prime Minister makes a few assumptions into the arguments that all parents are loving and warm and supportive and will give you love and attention. And that's not an assumption necessarily that should be made. But just because we actually want to have a debate, we'll assume that for now for a little bit. And you have all this love and you have all this attention and you have all this, mythical attention in this Pollyanna world that you live in. And then all of a sudden, a younger sibling comes and guess what? It's taken away. It's divided into 2. And ladies and gentlemen of the House, Mr. Speaker, we feel that sort of damage does more to older older children than anything else. It actually makes older children worse because they've had this nirvana, apparently, and then all of a sudden, it's taken away from them. How many mass murderers, how many serial killers, really, when you think about it, how many mass murderers and serial killers come from huge families? They're loners, they're one child. I mean, let's get real here. I mean, think about it. You know, Swiss Family Robinson, the Sound of Music kids, any of them turn into mass murderers? Of course not. Because by having children, by having younger siblings, they are well adjusted. They learn to interact with other people. They learn to interact with their parents, with their schoolmates, with their people that they work with. They are from a younger point. So oldest children don't have it best. Older children don't have it best. The arguments that the Prime Minister makes is wrong. The Prime Minister also talks about the relationship of the parents. And coming personal experience, my relationship with my parents was the same regardless of whether or not, there was one of us or there was more of us. Older children don't have it best. Older children don't have it best. Another argument which the Prime Minister made was a financial aspect, was that somehow because the older children are by themselves, the full financial resources can be placed on that child. And the opposition disagrees. The opposition believes that the financial resources can be shared. And in fact, there are many financial resources which are improved or have more money given to you when you have more children. Tax deductions, more children, more tax deductions, more dependents, everything along those lines of argument, where just because being an oldest child does not mean you have to have it best. Another argument which the government made was the social considerations, that oldest children have it best because there's no sibling rivalry, and that there's no strain on the parents. I don't know how many members of the House are parents or wish to be parents, but raising one child is incredibly hard. Raising even one child is incredibly hard. Raising more than one child is, ironically, almost a little bit easier because you can use the techniques, you can use the experience that you have in raising everyone. And then the Prime Minister made a specific point which we thought was rather interesting based on our own personal experiences, was that, I quote, "You're winging it with the second and third child. You are winging it the more children you have, and that the first child usually comes out perfect." And that's not our experience, and that's not the experience of anything. If you do something for the first time, that's when you usually make mistakes. That's when you usually get things wrong. That's when you usually sort of learn and fumble as you go about. That's when you don't know how to hold a baby and you perhaps drop it on its head, for example. That's when you're not watching your child and it may get burned or it runs away. I mean, you make mistakes you make mistakes with the first child. And there's no argument about that. You make mistakes with the first child, and that older child does not have it best. The older child, because all these mistakes are being made upon him or her, actually has it worse. You're not winging it with the second child. You're not winging it with the third child. Furthermore, the older child has to forge its way in terms of attention. They get all the attention, too much attention. There's only two parents, one child. All the attention is driven on them. It's not a place you want to be, having two parents and one child. It's lonely. You don't have anyone to relate to. Once you go home, you just go to your parents and that's it. you're forging all the boundaries as an older child, and that is tiring, and you get all the punishment because of it. You get all the detriment because of that. And all these are all the things that are associated with older children, as well as psychological studies which may appear that older children have a higher risk of depression and suicide. Now, because of all of this, the government has painted a rosy picture that older children have it best, and the opposition violently disagrees with that. Older children do not have it best. We urge the House to vote for the opposition.
The commentary there just made me think, how many of you who are older children were a mistake? You don't need to answer. It's a rhetorical question there. We shall proceed. We shall proceed to the member of government. We'll have 5 minutes to present the government's case yet again. Mr. Day, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
The opposition says that that not all firstborn turn out best. Now, we didn't make that claim. We're talking about generalities here. They speak about the novelty, for example, that since the energy on the firstborn is greater than it may be on the second children, that the parents can give them more consideration. And they said that's not true of all parents. Well, we're not talking about all parents. We're talking about the generalities, the likelihood, the drift of human compassion and reason and energy as the marriage goes on. He says that firstborn children turn out to be killers and psychopaths. Clifford Olson. Where he gets this stuff. I mean, in 15 minutes, does he run out and do psychological studies? To listen to him, you would think that he does, for God's sake. He goes on to make the point that older children have no one to adjust with. They have, when they come home from school, they're clinging on to mom's coattails. Well, I guess I could trade hard luck stories with anybody, but in most families there are playmates and there are children in the apartment building and children in the neighborhood and so forth, at least in the very early years of the marriage. Typically what happens in a marriage is that when the firstborn arrives, the parents are struggling along, they don't have a lot of money. We never did make the claim that the firstborn gets all of the money, that in the sense that they're being spoiled. We don't make that claim. Traditionally what happens is that they get some of the resources, and later on, as the marriage moves along and the dad grows up into the job and so does mom, she's given up nursing, she's back earning, and there's more money coming in, there is a greater likelihood that the subsequent children, the second and third children along the line, will probably be spoiled because there's more resources. So he makes the point as well that as the marriage goes on, that the family allowance and tax benefits, which doesn't come anywhere close to accounting for the kind of financial spoiling that the opposition alludes to. But it does make the point that more money is coming in and that the second and third children will probably have more resources. So in that sense, the first child is less likely to become spoiled, at least as a result of financial lavishment. Okay. They say one child it's harder to raise one child than two. Well, the average lifespan of a marriage, a North American marriage, Canadian American, I don't think it matters much, is about 7 years. And around that time, there's a split. The divorce may come later on. So, preceding the split is the enmity and the friction and the lack of love and the lack of support and the troubles that inhabit any household once the marriage breaks down. And the children sense this. So the second and third children are more likely to feel that friction, to feel that lack of love. The parents have ceased to love each other and find it consequently tougher to raise the second and third child. So raising the first child is relatively easy. relative to having to raise 3 or 4 of them in addition to the first. So the first kid gets born on third base in that regard. At least they are spared that friction in their most formative years, as my colleague pointed out, in the first 3 or 4 years of life. The time when needing that nourishment is most acute. And also we want to make the point that not only grandparents, but the extended family, the sisters, the cousins, the in-laws, the very neighborhood that we pointed out to, that I pointed out to a moment ago, that couples grow up in, the neighbors that they perhaps went to school with, all of these people are brought into that extended band of adults who look after the child. And what is the African axiom, it takes a whole village to raise a child. So early children have that. It's later on when the marriage breaks down, they disperse, they have to go to new neighborhoods. Those second and third children are not getting that kind of love and attention, and are therefore much less likely to turn out to be well adjusted, which was the basis of our definition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. And to wind up the first part of the debate, I would like to invite up for 5 minutes the member of the opposition, Jim.
Start. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Government, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go back to the Prime Minister's definition, shall we? He identified oldest children have it best as the firstborns have a greater likelihood to be well-adjusted adults. Now, there are several points raised here that didn't really get adequately addressed when it comes to this definition. Is it likely that well-adjusted adults come out of being the most important child in the family, ergo being selfish because they have undivided attention of the parents? Is it likely that well-adjusted adults are used to getting their own way with everything and not being versed in the ideas of compromise, which later children bring to the family unit? Do firstborn in their first couple of years actually relate to other children particularly well? No, because they are based around themselves and it's two parents, and that is their world. I would like to bring up the point that the Prime Minister was trying to play it both ways, because he identified several points as having undivided love and attention, undivided emotional help. And then he went on later in his opening presentation to say, well, these parents are exhausted. Well, what is it that means it's undivided if you have exhausted parents there? Being a parent, you will know that the first one is so exhausting, and the first one, if the first one has a degree and a half above normal, you're down at the hospital. You are down there wondering what this child is doing, whether it's going to live. You are there making sure that this offspring lives. That undivided attention is good for the child, but it does not raise a well-adjusted adult. Bringing more children into the life of this firstborn means that the child has to adjust, and as the leader of the opposition put to you, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a particularly good situation for the firstborn to be in. So, I'd like to bring up the idea that the leader of the opposition brought up. When the children are growing up, both the parents can go out to work, and subsequently all the children get more attention, whereas the Prime Minister said undivided love and attention is what they need, and use that as an argument. So between the Prime Minister and the seconder, there is a dichotomy here that says, well, It's okay in this situation where they have undivided love and attention, but it's okay later on to go out to work and not give any of them any love and attention. So there's something amiss there. Now, the leader of the opposition, as a leader, the Prime Minister brought up, as the leader of the opposition brought up, the Secretary of the government thinks that just winging it is how you do it for the second and third one. Well, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you, as a leader of the opposition, says, you are winging it from the very beginning. And the chance of the second and third child being more capable of fitting into society and being well adjusted is far greater than the first one. Let me just bring up a few personal instances. The first child of mine, we winged it and we didn't know what we were doing and we were exhausted. And the first one, when I was changing his diapers, I stuck a pin right through it. Ooh, ow. The second one didn't get that. So the first one was instantly less well adjusted than the second one because the second one didn't get stuck. Also, the first one, historically, they were the ones that went down the pits. They weren't the ones that went to college. The first ones had the responsibility to look after the family. They didn't go to college and say, okay, now it's up to you guys. These guys had to become the breadwinners. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope that these points have proven to you that you should vote against the...
Well said.
The motion. There's something in
You
there.
should share this with a bottle. This is the comedy debate.
It's starting to be the comedy debate, isn't it? That's it. So, would you suggest he's the oldest child? Is he having it best right now? We're not sure. We'll find out soon. Nonetheless, to continue on with the opposition's arguments, we will have now 2 minutes summation to ideally re-emphasize the points previously made and wind up the opposition side of the debate for 2 minutes with a bell at 1. Adrian.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House, Mr. Speaker, what can I say that already hasn't been said before? But because we do have a need to fill the time, I will valiantly try to carry on. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, Mr. Speaker, the government has put forward a case saying that oldest children have it best. They're generally more well adjusted. The summation of the opposition's case is no, they are not. Because of the undivided attention that they are given by both parents, because of the fact that they are trailblazers in the sense that they are forging responsibilities, testing boundaries that have not been tested, because of all the attention that is given to them. And attention is not a good thing necessarily, as we did point out. It can be a bad thing. Is that these oldest children are saddled with the responsibilities that have been placed on them far too early for the rest of their lives. It does not make them more well-adjusted adults. It makes them less well-adjusted adults. It makes them prone to all sorts of problems, both real and psychological, as we have mentioned before. And because of that, we feel that the opposition's motion should be supported. And for the case of this debate, I am a younger child. Thank you very much.
There we are. And now,
Follow that.
and indeed we shall. And I would like to invite the not firstborn Prime Minister, Michael, for his 2-minute summation. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think you just hoisted your own petard, whatever that means. Ladies and gentlemen, discontinue the suggestion that mass murderers are usually only children. This is not a debate about only children. This is a debate about multi-children families. So, meaningless comment. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could replay this, you will hear that the leader of the opposition said raising one child is hard, and then suggested that it's easier when you've got more, and therefore they benefit better. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have a feeling that the leader of the opposition has not washed diapers for 3 or 4 kids, that has not yet had to help 3 or 4 children with homework or school problems or having to buy clothes or Christmas presents. And I suggest that is it easier to send 3 kids to college than 1? I don't think so. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that most people, if you ask them if they had a choice where in the birth order they would like to be, they would suggest, I would like to be first. I would have liked to be first, and that's because they have their own experiences, and they see the experiences of people around them. Another point, the member of the opposition said that the firstborn get their own way. Ladies and gentlemen, enlightened parents don't give any of their children their own way. If they study what it is like child psychology, they don't give anybody in their life, period. But they don't give their firstborn children or any of their children their own way. That is not how to bring up kids. And if that's the way, if you only bring up, well, I've said that, I'm not saying that again, that if you're giving any of your children their own way, you're not going to be a good parent, and none of your kids will be well adjusted. Another point, that it was easier, and that people with their first child, they whip them off to the hospital when they're ill. Well, first thing, I'm not sure that's such a bad idea. I'm undone? I'm not sure that's such a bad idea. And you try going to the hospital when you got 3 kids at home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. That is the end of the formal debate. We're going to now welcome the adjudicator for this evening, and he will have 7 minutes now, so give it, yes, so bell at 6, to give his perspective and award, actually, for tonight's debate. I'd like to welcome Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, this was a very entertaining debate to watch. I found that each debater brought a lot to the table. There was actually a lot there, and for the metaphorical table, and for an impromptu debate, that's tricky. That's tough to do. There was a lot here, and there was a lot for me to pour over. So I congratulate all the debaters on that. So we move to the scorecard. In terms of arguments, which these are all being pulled out of thin air in 20 minutes. We started out very well from the Prime Minister, some well-labeled, well-numbered, nicely divided into little umbrellas, emotional, social, economic. That was nicely done, well done, and they were well explained. And then the Secretary for the government also came out with a couple arguments, fewer, but he was also doing some rebuttals as well, but he did still have some good arguments in there. Subsequent, children are spoiled, marriages collapse, which I thought was a very good argument, talking about that timeline there. And I will briefly step into content, because content is really hard to get in an impromptu debate. There really isn't much time or any ability to actually search for information. In fact, we don't allow that, no electronic devices. So it really has to be what you already know, which means there's some dubious sources in the debate tonight, which I will talk about. But I thought that David on the government side had a great argument and was well supported with his content. So that was nice. And moving over to the opposition side, I found that your arguments were, in general, they felt a bit rushed, because I thought that in both cases, they were kind of jammed in at the end after a lot of good rebuttals, which I'll get to. But in terms of unique arguments for the opposition side, you did have them. Adrian, your arguments about no more Nirvana, how bad is that for a firstborn, and too much attention, too much negative attention, but then also contrasting with the lonely argument. Good arguments, but not all that well developed. And from Jim, very rushed, very last second, kind of put them in just as you got the warning bell. And one was actually very difficult to understand. Something about bringing more kids in complicates the life of the firstborn, really not well explained. And but you did have that one good argument about the firstborn traditionally takes care of the family, and it's the subsequent children that get benefits from that. So in general, the government side took it from the argument side, and then going into content again, the fact that the government I felt had the best content. Again, this is the best I can do to verify how well these things are actually supported. But I found that the government just had the most in there. I don't really have to have a chance to talk very much about this because there wasn't much content in the debate. And I really wonder about Adrian's, the firstborn is at the highest risk for suicide and depression. I'll have to look it up. Someone playing the Toronto Debating Society home game, please look this up for us. Okay, so moving on to rebuttal and refutation. As I alluded to earlier, talking about argument, the opposition had some fantastic rebuttals. And in fact, they contrasted well with each other in terms of how the rebuttals were done. Adrian, leader of the opposition, you hit one by one each point. I don't think you missed a single one that the Prime Minister brought up. That was very well done. And then opposition seconder, you questioned the entire thrust of the government's base by saying, well, ergo, everything that they've said, does that actually prove the point? So you kind of, Adrian, you hit everything individually, and Jim, you hit everything together. And I thought those rebuttals were very well done. And it's because you scored so well in your rebuttal section is why your argument score suffered. And rebuttal and refutation, David, you had a lot to do, a big job, and I did think that you hit most of the arguments that you could. And unfortunately, I couldn't count the rebuttals that were done during the summation because that's not where those come from. That's not what I'm looking for. So I did score the opposition higher in terms of the rebuttal and refutation. Very, very well done. Nicely opposed. For the teamwork side, I found that the government painted an excellent picture in terms of the development of their arguments. We had the Prime Minister come out talking about the early benefits, about how you get this good attention early on, and then the seconder for the government came right in and said, and then there's detriments that happen later when a marriage falls apart and other eventualities. So it was a very nice picture. And from the opposition side, compared to that picture, they felt a little bit isolated presentations, and that might simply be because their arguments were rushed, the teamwork felt a little bit less developed because the arguments didn't have enough time to kind of have an organic growth together. So on that side, the government edged ahead slightly. For style and rhetoric, this was a very riveting debate to watch. Everyone had a unique style. I think these are some pretty heavy hitters. These are some pretty veteran debaters that we have. Everyone did very well. There was because I had to find something to deduct points from. Jim, there was some real mangled speech in the middle there, and support the opposition's motion, and it was mangled. It was mangled a little bit. So for style points, that's all I can say. But on the other hand, in terms of style, Jim came right back and said, well, you know what? I stabbed my firstborn. I didn't stab my second.
We win!
So that was, from stylistically, that was just a quick quote. I know it's not a direct quote, but I loved it. It takes a village quote from David. That was great. So some excellent, and of course, Michael coming out with the My Sister quote. Everyone had a neat quote, something neat to say. I loved the Nirvana quote, just saying, you've had Nirvana and then it's taken away. That's a great picture. It's a great style to come up from. And so it was a close debate. A lot of the teams had different strengths, and when I crunched the numbers, here's how it comes down to it. So the government has won the debate with a score of 61 to the opposition's 45. And I thought that the best speaker was Adrian. So, if I could see the Prime Minister.
On behalf of my partner.
The Adjudicator's Cup. Congratulations. Madam, Mr. Speaker.
We have to give it back now?
Not yet.
We give it back?
We can hold on for a sec. That's okay. So do we have the Best Speaker Award now? Oh, is the most popular?
Opposition to government 9-7.
Opposition won. 9-7. Okay.
Hey.
All right, we'll take
Popular vote. Come up. We're on the Which one was the firstborn now?
I was.
Yeah. Congratulations. Thank you. There we go. Thank you very much for participating, and to the debaters as well. And I will turn it back over to our chair for this evening.